Welcome to Quilting's first reality show. Yes. Unscripted and live with Susan Smith. Yes.
Hello there and welcome. I'm Susan Smith. You're in my studio, Stitched by Susan. And that Yoda wannabe is our son, Will. He does all kinds of vocal imitations, so he made me a few introductions. I think I need to get some more. You've probably heard all of these before, but it is a fun thing. This morning I am working on a custom quilting project. It is a smallish one. So it is from when I was making this quilt that is behind me. It was a block of the month project, and I'll tell you more about it a little later on. But this one row, I wasn't happy with the coloring within the quilt, so I took the one row out, and it's now going to be a table runner. So it's the perfect size to do for a live and unscripted show because we can do it from beginning and end, and it's not too long. So live and unscripted means that I'm welcoming you into my studio to see whatever it is that I happen to be working on. It is frequently client quilts. In this case, it is my quilt. It is not projects that I purposely make for the shows. So I just say this because last week there was difficulty seeing. I was quilting in a light thread on a light colored quilt, and a number of people reached out to me and said, why didn't you do a different thread so that we could all see it? So I just want to reiterate, I'll make it as good and as clear as I can, but the purpose of this show is to just show you what in fact I am working on. So some of them are clearer than others. That has to do with fabric and color, and in fact the lighting of the day outside makes a difference too, and how well it shows up on camera. So I'll do my best, but please don't have the high expectation of this being a lesson or tutorial. This is just me casually working in real time and inviting you to watch over my shoulder as I do so. So today I'll be chatting about the things that come with a custom quilting project. So I've already got it basted, but we're going to be loading on the ruler plate and doing some basic ruler work, a few geometric designs, some stitching in the ditch, and then a fill behind those designs. So I've got some tips for you on using rulers and in fact marking with them. So that's kind of what's on tap for today. So a couple other places that you can find me before we get into the quilting. We're on YouTube right now and Facebook, and these live episodes generally air the first and third Friday of each month. It does vary just a little bit as I'm traveling some these days, so there's the occasional time that I can't be here on that specific weekend. So if you're signed up for my newsletter, I try and let you know in advance what dates are coming up and if I have to move them. But I try to do first and third Friday of each month, always at 9 a.m. Pacific time. If you do want to receive my newsletter, just head to my website, stitchedbysusan.com. You'll get one of those handy little pop-ups. It'll be offering you something free, and you'll also get the newsletter. A couple other places. I do have a podcast. It's called Measure Twice, Cut Once. And in fact, that's where I got to know Adria, who's a person who chimed in our introductory comments before we came on air. I interviewed her for my podcast. She's another long arm quilter and a very great one, and YouTuber as well. So look up Adria Good, Quilting Coach Chick, and have a look at her shows as well. Anyway, podcast, Measure Twice, Cut Once. Casual, usually conversations with other crafters or quilters, occasionally episodes by myself, but just some easy listening. Those can all be found at podcast.stitchedbysusan.com. And just a little postscript, we've been listened to on every continent except Antarctica. So if you happen to be going there, would you give a listen to the podcast while you're there and just chalk up one download for it? What else am I missing, Dave? I need to give some credits here before I go on and into the quilting. First and foremost is my husband, Dave, who I call Mr. Producer. And he sits behind the scenes kind of in front of me. There you go. What you can't see is the bird's nest of wires that are on the other side of his desk. But it's getting to be a bit of a production, and it's not something I could do by myself. So I'm extremely grateful that he does that portion of it for me. And he does, by the way, have a day job. But because he works in a church, Friday is one of his weekend days. And so he gives up his Fridays, some of his Fridays, to do this with us. So very grateful for that. Also, our son Will, who did the voice, as I mentioned, and does most of the introductions at the beginning of each show. And finally, our good friend Dan Unger, who provides the guitar music that you get to hear throughout these episodes. So lovely, so beautiful, and it is not available commercially for sale, but he graciously allows us to use his song. So we appreciate that. Okay, have I covered everything? I think I have. Another sip of coffee. I have a funny story for you. This past week, I was a guest on Sue Pelland's Facebook page. So she is an appliquer. If you look for Sue Pelland Designs, you'll find her. And so we were chatting. It was just a very casual conversation over about an hour. And we got talking about coffee because we're both coffee drinkers. And she has this fabulous cup she's telling me about that keeps her coffee hot. And it's a smart cup. She can control it with an app on her phone. So, of course, I quickly went to Amazon to look this up. And it's $125. So I guess I'm drinking lukewarm coffee for the moment. But I did set up my little electric cup warmer plate today. It's in an awkward location, so I don't know how it's going to work, but if you see me walk out of camera, that's probably what I'm doing, is grabbing my coffee cup and trying to keep it a little bit warmish. Okay, Mr. Producer had a thought he was trying to tell us.
We've had a request for watching where the magnets go, but I can't get the roving camera to work, so we're not going to have the shop up watch next week in Tri-Cities. We'll try to have one.
Okay. So there's been a request that we would show where my magnets are and where they attach. So Dave has been unable to get what he calls the roving camera. So in other words, one that he carries around the room. It is not connecting this morning. That is just one of the problems we were having. We've currently got 5 cameras connected and number 6 is balking. So I'm sorry we can't show that today. However, there are other episodes that do show it. And I want to tell you about one more thing. The quilt show that I'm going to be at in Tri-Cities, the Bernina booth is reserving a long arm for my use for doing some demos and things throughout that show. So number 1, if you're in Tri-Cities, stop by because I've got some fun, kind of 15-minute long little demos that are going on throughout the weekend. So it's the 24th and 25th of March. And secondly, we are going to attempt to air a short live and unscripted from the floor of the quilt show. So tune in next Friday. This is kind of a bonus live and unscripted. There's a lot of moving parts, as you might imagine, but thinking that we might want to do this in the future, we thought this is a great opportunity to try it out. And so if it works, you'll see us live, but I will be scheduling it this week and you'll see that live event on my YouTube channel and Facebook page. So tune in if you have a moment next Friday. Yeah, that's that. Another sip of coffee and we're going to get started. Let's see if I can make the coffee warmer work. See, when I stand holding my cup, then it turns off because it thinks she's gone. So again today, and especially if you're just tuning in, we're working on a custom project. Can we show the project a little bit, Dave? Here it is. So this, as I said, was a row that was intended for the quilt that's behind me, but the colors I didn't feel blended well when I started laying out the whole quilt, so I repieced this particular row, took it out, and I'm making a table runner with it. This pattern, I said I was going to tell you a little more about that. It's called STARSTRUCK, the whole quilt is. And I have not designed a lot of patterns, but this was one of them. And I released it as a block of the month. And each row was done in a different month. And each row, they're all stars, clearly, STARSTRUCK, but each row highlights some different skills. So the one you're seeing here in the runner, I used the Tri-Rex rulers. Some other skills that are in the quilt are piecing flying geese, mini piecing, working with bias edges of fabric, specialty trimming to get a kind of unique look out of a block, things like that. So that was kind of my goal, was to design a quilt that was not overly fussy, and they're not new and original blocks. They're all traditional blocks that have kind of been reimagined, but to have this kind of compendium of skills. And so the pattern includes a ton of sewing tips and piecing tips, and even has links to other mini tutorials that go with it. So tutorials about the trimming, or about making accurate flying geese, or tips for the mini piecing. For example, there's half square triangles in the little mini stars, and they're all pieced, sewn in one long strip, and then it's the way that they're cut, so you don't have to piece each half square triangle, that sort of thing. So that's what makes my brain tick, and I try to pack as much of that information into the pattern as I could. And Mr. Producer and I worked like crazy this week to get those monthly patterns all compiled into one downloadable PDF, and we got it done in the wee hours of this morning. So Mr. Producer is going to put a link into the show notes to my Etsy shop. It is already in the comments, apparently. So it is available there. It's called STARSTRUCK. It's $19.97. It's a downloadable PDF pattern, and I think it's 44 pages.
Yes.
It's crazy. Anyway, It's quite fun. But you're getting a good look at it because it's on the wall behind me. And there are some other pictures in the pattern of other versions that I made, which are not this highly detailed and highly custom. It lends itself to much more casual quilts too. But this one has this gorgeous yarrow background, which is by Paintbrush Studios, and the prints are Allison Glass fabrics. Mr. Producer's making violent signs. Okay, I'm going to go through my tools and then I'm going to start doing some marking, and I'll keep chatting. A few of you are asking about my freehand quilting masterclass, and I'll chat about that a moment or two, but I do want to get going so that it's not all talk at the beginning. But I have a couple tools that I'm using today, and I want to show them because if you're quilting something like this, you may be able, if you don't have the exact ones, to find things that will work in their place. I'm going to quilt. Can we look at the one? Oh, see, we can't see that top row, can we? We're going to be quilting some circles, which you'll see me quilting, and this is for marking purposes only. And then I found a ruler among my small collection, which has, I don't think you have to move the camera, Dave, it's fine, which has multiple sizes of inner and outer curves. And so I just found the one that matched my marking curve and was a 1/4 inch larger. It's this one right here. So if you don't have the precise ruler, it is also possible to use anything that is round to mark the size of circle that you want. And if you've got it marked, it's reasonably easy to use a different curve of ruler and move the ruler along the marking. So you don't have to have this exact thing, is all I'm saying. And then, oh, there we go. You can see on these stars up here, we're going to quilt almost identically this thing. We're going to put these 3 circles in here. We're going to do the ribbon candy on the borders above and below. And I'm going to do something a little different. Of course, you can't even see it within the stars. So that's that. Then the other thing that I've got, and let's have the close up. Let me just get Stella off here, and I want to show you this one because it's kind of remarkable. Scissors. I just tossed the scissors on the floor. Hang on a sec. I am still waiting. I've ordered some nifty little magnets that attach to my machine. They're just little round dots with adhesive backings. And I want one for my scissors, and I'm waiting. I don't know what has happened to Prime Delivery, but it's not 2 day anymore. You're lucky if it's 2 weeks. Okay, here's my close-up of my ruler, because I kind of want to point this one out. See my little black dots on there? Is it better if I turn my light off? Let's experiment, you guys. Let me know how this lighting looks. Every week we do this because it's different on every fabric. That's probably going to be better. What do you think, Dave? Okay. Anyway, you see my little black dots on here. All I've done is I've pre-planned where I want my 3 circles to be. Because they're kind of unequal, I've just chosen where they're going to be the one time. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these units that I'm going to put the dots in. By marking it on my ruler, I can then drop in those marks super easily onto my quilt. So let's go to the edge one, because why not start at the left and work toward the right? So I've made it so that my ruler is bumping up against the seam here. I should mark the center, and I will do that. So this is about, might be better on the overhead camera now to see what I'm doing kind of overall. And you guys give us some feedback on the lighting. It looks very dark to me on the screen, but sometimes those shadows are easier than not. Stella's in the way. Okay, I will move Stella. And I'll be working my way down the runner as well, so they'll be able to see more. So all I'm doing is in these central portions, I am marking, okay, I got to get my words together, you guys. Star blocks, obviously, spacers between them. So in these spacers, I'm finding the center. I'm dropping a line there because I want my circle dots, buttons, call them what you will, to be centered. And then I'm using my black dots that I've pre-drawn on my ruler. I put those on with the dry erase marker because that's what was close to hand. You can also do it with a Sharpie, And when your quilt is finished, then just take a little alcohol swab and they come right off. But it's an easy way, especially if you've got unequal divisions and it's a pain to figure out. You only have to figure it out one time. And then just use your ruler over and over again until that quilt is done. I do that often when I've got to divide things in, 5 equal parts or something like that. Do the math once. It saves you from making mistakes too. So I'm just marking all my dots. With the little crosshairs, basically. But I think in terms of actual quilting, we're going to do stitching in the ditch next. I did not show all the loading process today because I wasn't sure how long this custom quilting would take, and I thought we needed to save a little time. But if you want to see how I load, look back at the last 2 episodes. The last one was a all over feather variation. The one before that was making waves. In both of those, I showed my loading process. Oops, I forgot the 3 dots. See, I don't know how well it's going to work to custom quilt and talk at the same time. We'll just see. Okay, one other thing I'd like to talk about. Can we see the whole thing pretty much, Mr. Producer, sir? I don't see it at all on camera right now. There we go. You can get the idea of what I'm talking about here in just a sec. Nope, we're good. I'll move Stella. Here's the idea I'm trying to convey. I've got my runner laid out, and of course, because it's so narrow, I was able to baste around the whole thing. So the perimeter is all in place. I have found in my experience, if I were to start at one edge and quilt things coming this way, I would be pretty apt to end up with some excess fabric going on down here. So what I do just as a rule of thumb now is when I've got a big expanse like this, I divide and conquer. So I'm going to come in the middle and stitch in the ditch, and then do something on each side. And just by doing the middle one, I've, cut in half the amount of things that can go wrong, right? Depending on how many you have, that might work out super smoothly or not. But either way, you're just dividing it up and conquering that so that you don't have any excess at the end. I do need to put my side clamps on. I see that I don't have those on yet. And then I think we're ready to go. And the great thing is we won't have to advance at all today. It's the little things. So the side clamps that I'm using are the Red Snapper brand. Where's the other one? There it is. And I do love these clamps because they are so long, because they put nice even tension on the whole exposed edge of my quilt. I do love them. And one last thing before I quilt. Yesterday I was using Deco Bob thread in the bobbin, which is a very fine 80 weight thread. And I was messing around with my tension a little bit to make that come out well, and also I was quilting on a double bat. So today now I've gone back to my more usual Isacord 100% poly, and it's a 40 weight, and I've got it top and bottom. But I thought it's worthwhile to put this little swatch on the end and just check out my tension and make sure that it's okay. I readjusted my bobbin with my TOA gauge, but just to make sure. Oh, got basting on still. Let's change that. So when I check my tension, I try and do squares so I get a couple of corners, and also to do some loops. And then I will cut the thread and have a look. So I start on my tension checks. Let me pull it back so you can see a bit. I start by running my fingernail really firmly on the bottom edge, and I can feel if there's any laddering there. I can also tell with the loops, if they're kind of pulling up into a button and you can feel the edges of them, you know your tension's not quite right either. And then of course you can see it visibly from the top. You certainly could get a mirror and look underneath. I can see it at the edge. It all seems to be good. I'm happy. Okay, we're in business. We're going to start with doing some stitching in the ditch, and to do that I need, oh, I've moved my things around to make room for cameras. I need my ruler plate, so I'm going off camera to get that. I'll be right back. And I'll show you guys another of my shortcuts, because this is all about a reality show, right? I have to take my side clamp off. And while I do that, let me encourage you to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps with visibility if you do that. And if you click on the bell, you will also get notifications whenever I go live. And if you want to support the show, but aren't yet at the point where you want classes, you can do that very easily at buymeacoffee.com/stitched by Susan. There, for as little as $5, you can support the show, or you can choose to do it monthly if you wish. Okay, here's one of my handy dandy shortcuts, and this is just a personal preference. Can we even see this? I've got this little rubber stopper in my hand. Oh, now we got it. There we go. It's just very dark. So it is intended to screw onto the front of my plate to be a barrier against the front rail of the quilting machine. But because I'm not even quilting near to the front edge today, where's my hand, near this front edge, I'm not even going to bother putting it on. It does only take a minute, but it's a minute I don't have to spend. So we're just going to leave that aside. But that is something to be aware of on your machine. Be sure to be familiar with whatever your ruler plate is and what things you need to do to, make any adjustments for it. Are they about loading and basting? Apparently there are lots of comments. They're just, okay, let's take a minute. I'll get another sip in and then we'll start stitching. Grabbing my coffee off the trusty warmer. See how it's doing. Okay, I'm ready. Nancy, what disappearing pen do you use? It is a no-name brand, I believe. Let's see. This is a Chaco Ace pen. I buy them off Amazon. I usually get them in bags of a dozen. Sometimes I get duds in there, but they're so inexpensive that I don't really care. That's what I use. So this is an air disappearing pen. Linda, I used air erase marker recently and the marks aren't going away. After 2 days, tried water with baking soda. Still no luck. Any ideas? Wow. I can't say I have a great idea. I have never had that happen where one did not come out. I have many times used markers heavily and then actually rinsed the quilt to get them out to make sure it was gone. I'm sorry, I have not. YouTube. Google it. Adria, this live video is getting excited about getting home. Oh, got it. And getting back to my machine. It's been almost a month. Adria's been on holidays and fishing. Tisk, tisk. Thanks for the inspiration, etc. June, how do you like the Deco Bob? I used it recently for piecing and loved it. I haven't used it for piecing. I loved it in the bobbin. It holds almost twice as much as my Isacord bobbin. So, I mean, who doesn't love that? Changing a bobbin half as often. Okay, next question. Mr. Producer's doing several different things at once. Cindy, does Dave do the sound booth at your church? Sometimes he does, but he's actually the administrator, so he does lots of things. Julianne, it was great to see last week's light thread on light fabric. I learned so much about making it easier for me to see when I'm quilting and having trouble seeing where I've already quilted. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that, because there were a number of people that were not best pleased. Deirdre, while watching while getting my space ready for my new Bernina longarm to be delivered. Woo, that's exciting. Chime in on what machine you're getting, please. Susan, what are your side clamps? Do they interfere with your movement at the edges? Good question, Susan. So I did mention that they are by Red Snapper. That's the brand. And they're fairly slim profile, so they don't interfere too badly. So one of two things. When I'm doing a custom quilt like this that has ruler work, I try and leave a wider span at each side so there's room for my rulers. When I'm working on edge to edge, I will often put the clamp on and then put a yardstick that just elevates whatever the strings are holding my clamp and just elevate them a little bit, and then I don't have trouble with them. But this is why long armers ask for excess to be all the way around the quilt, right? You do need a little bit of space to attach your clamps. Yes, you do.
This is one along those lines.
Can you show the side clamps? Mine is super stiff and extremely difficult to close. So this is the clamp. Can you see the end of it? Sort of. So it does have a very slim channel that the fabric has to go into. That took some sort of practice in getting used to. And they were stiffer to close when I first received them. They have loosened up a little bit. Otherwise, it might be worth calling the Red Snapper people. I actually did that at one point because I was having such difficulty getting my thread into the clamp. And they gave me some tips. One of them is to use a corsage pin to just, you know, holding the clamp with one hand and smooth the fabric in with the other hand. That works pretty good too. Give that a try. Okay, we ready to start quilting?
Yeah, whatever you like.
We're going to do it. I'm going to put these rulers aside because I'm going to use a straight ruler for stitching in the ditch. I know you all will want to know what this ruler is too, so I'll tell you right now. This is by A1 Quilting Machines is the brand. I purchased it through greenfairyquilts.com. Judy Madsen, whose name is on it because she knows it and loves it too. What I love about this ruler is it's a medium length. It's 9 inches, so long enough for most things, short enough to be, you know, get in the corners for the most part. And what I especially love is the handle. You can see the slanted handle because it enables me, you'll see as I work today, it enables me to grasp it in various different ways and keeps my hand from getting as tired. If you're working on a large custom project and all you've got is pushability, your hand gets really fatigued really quickly. So I love a ruler with a handle. Mr. Producer has a question. Oh, we have another comment coming. Sue, can you explain the difference between your advanced class and the master class? Sure, I'll start stitching in the ditch and then I will talk about that. So let's get our ditch stitching going. When I pieced this quilt, I paid attention to my pressing because I knew I'd be the one quilting it. And I have pressed all these seams to one side toward the golden. So I'm going to stitch in the ditch on the printed side. And I'm just going to work my way around the outside of the star. While I do that, I'll talk about those classes, and then I will probably have to concentrate a little bit just to keep my thread path and the order of stitching in my head. I find it difficult to do custom stitching and talking at the same time. Let me just check where my ditch is. See, it's good I did because on this side of the angle, it's pressed toward the print. And that was probably to alleviate some fullness at the points. It's a couple years since I pieced this, so I can't altogether remember my train of thought. Okay, while I work my way around this, let's talk about classes. My Freehand Quilting Masterclass is my major online course. It is big. It is delivered over 6 weeks, and it includes just over 30 different freehand designs. It includes demos at the machine, some of them demos on a whiteboard, and lots of discussion about how to do them, about the various pitfalls, about how to add variables. Also, I have lots of discussion about some of my favorite tools and studio tips. And in addition, I focus quite heavily on talking about my thought process for a freehand design, like what I think makes a good one, so that when you're finished this course, you've got a great launching pad for finding your own ideas and creating quilting designs from them. There's a method to that, or at least for me there is. And so you can do it too. You can take the same thought process and translate it. You can do the same thing to try out a design and to change things in it until it's graceful and pleasing and moves easily across a quilt top and doesn't paint you in corners, that sort of thing. So that's kind of what that's all about. Now, Advance is not actually a course. Advance is a monthly subscription membership. And I kind of introduced this for students who were wanting more, who had been through the master class, for people who maybe didn't want to make the commitment to such a huge master class, and also so that I could introduce some different topics, because I bring in guest speakers talking about different things than freehand edge-to-edge quilting. And so in that membership then, new lessons are released every month, and they might be different things. They might be an additional freehand design. They also might be about custom quilting. They might be about, a recent one was binding with facings. Well, binding is not really the right term. Finishing a quilt with a facing instead of a binding. So that kind of gives you a quick overview of those. I am marking my center squares. It's going to be difficult to see. It's difficult even for me because this is a very saturated print. But all I've done so far is mark an X from corner to corner, and I'm going to quilt additional points in there, but I'm going to do them by guess and by gosh, because that's the way I work. So for now, I'm just quilting from point to point, and I'm just trying to think this through to have the least thread cuts possible, right? That's why I went ahead and did this now while I'm stitching around the ditch of this star. And there is a certain amount of backtracking involved. I'm okay with that. Every time I turn a corner, I'm trying to determine again, where is the ditch side of my seam? And if, by the way, you were doing this on a project that did not have ditches, where the seams were pressed open, you would just stitch ever so slightly on one side. So here's my by guess and by goshing. I am aiming toward the center of each of these triangles. And I'm just working my way all around the square. And because they're not very big, I can eyeball that pretty accurately. Okay, and then the last thing that we're going to do, these points are actually quite slim. They're about 3 inches long and about 1.5 inches wide. That would be right, because this is a 3-inch finished square. So I'm not going to do a ton of quilting in these little edges. Maybe what I'll do actually, I'm just thinking here on my feet. No, I'm going to do it geometric. I was thinking if I wanted to put something curvy in there, but I don't. I really like this, the idea of just doing an echo slightly inside. So I've got probably a generous 1/4 inch. I think that's going to really emphasize the star shape. And I did not mention, I put Hobbs 80/20 batting is what I've got in here. I thought about putting a double layer. The quilt behind me has a double layer, so it has 80/20 on the bottom, and it has Hobbs 100% wool on the top, which causes the quilting to really, really, really pop and show. However, I thought for a minute about the purposes of this. I intend for it to be a table runner. Therefore, it is going to get washed, probably washed frequently in its lifetime. And thus I decided not to put wool in it because it's not as readily washable. It needs a little more care. So this is not very fussy custom quilting. It's very easy to do, but these simple echoes are pretty effective. They just draw your eye to the points of the stars. There we go. We're all the way around that one. A few lock stitches. So I think I said I'm using Isocord 100% poly thread. It is a 40 weight. It's a golden color, and I have it in both top and bottom. I've mentioned the batting. Anything else that I've missed of what I'm using? I don't think so. And I don't think there's a right or wrong order of doing this, but now that I've done the one, I'm thinking to myself, you know, it would be wise to go ahead and stitch the square in the middle. You know, the same idea of dividing and conquering, right? That kind of stabilizes the star. It can't shift to one side or the other. So why don't I go ahead and do that? You can see how handy the handle of my ruler is in this process. It allows me to flip this ruler this way and that and still be able to grasp it very securely. I showed you the loading of my ruler table. Most long arm machines, in fact all I believe, come with a table. It's often an optional accessory, but a table is essential to working with a ruler because you need a flat surface that's got a little bit of size to it to set your ruler on so that it doesn't wobble. So that's what that ruler plate does. It provides that surface. I'm just going to stop for half a second and trim my thread tails. Get them out of the way. I am not a perfect piecer, so as I go, I'm finding, you know, corners that do not exactly line up. I'm totally okay with that. It's all going to look great in the end. When I need to, I just, you know, backtrack a stitch or two or overlap a stitch or two. It's all good. When I am working on more complicated custom designs, I do plan out my order of stitching a little more, and then I always do it the same way. It might be just me, but I find that it's all too easy to forget an element. If there's very many elements, you know, this one's pretty simple, so it would be difficult to, but that sometimes helps to just keep me from getting sidetracked. Please, please tell me I'm not the only one that does that. I know I'm not, because some of you post pictures sometimes of quilts you've taken off your long arm, then you're like, oh look, there's one thing I missed. Had to load it back up. I think we've all done that a time or two. And now I see it would be wiser to do my X first, because I had to do one more backtrack there than was necessary. And this time I didn't even mark it. I'm just, oh, perfect. I'm just winging my X. Clearly my ruler can go from point to point. It's only when I'm traveling back to the center point that I could use a reference. I'm sure I've told you guys the story before, but some years ago, I was at a, 3 or 4 years ago, I was at a trunk show, and a very well-renowned long-arm quilter was showing all her quilts, and she's very artistic in her quilting. And this was the first time I had seen any of her quilts in person. And I was astonished to see how shall I say it, the level of relaxation in her quilting, how irregular in many cases, how imperfect in many cases it actually was. I found that to be super encouraging, because I was finding myself with custom quilting being hyper vigilant about, you know, how much I backtrack, or did my points exactly match, or oh my gosh, those two flowers don't look alike, or those two swirls. And just seeing her quilting in person, and she has quilted for big names in the quilting industry and does to this day. And her quilting is beautiful and artistic, and the overall effect was wonderful. And it was encouraging to see how relaxed she was about it. So, that's my pep talk for the day. This is a great ruler project to start with, something this size, a table runner. Quilting with rulers is a skill that takes a bit of practice, just in terms of, you know, how much pressure to place on the ruler, or how you have to judge by eye, because you're stitching 1/4 inch away from the edge of the ruler, so that too takes practice to judge where to place your ruler so that your stitching falls where you want it to land. So this is a great project to practice on. And, you know, in light of my previous comments, give yourself grace. Even if it does not look perfect, it is going to look beautiful. You can see right there the one that I just did. Like, I wasn't quite in the ditch. And it does not matter. I am definitely not undoing that. As a matter of fact, I think I was on the hillside of that particular road. And again, I'm not undoing it. That's all good. The people who sit at my table are going to be all admiration, and they will not be picking apart my quilting. For those of you who have machines that have some type of coasting as a stitching option, I have that turned off when I'm doing ruler work. So by coasting, I mean it's stitch regulation, but it even when you're holding still, the needle still bobs slowly up and down. And I prefer to not have that happening when I'm doing ruler work. I prefer for it to pause when I'm sitting perfectly still. You might experiment with both and see what you like. You can see that I'm often, when I'm traveling in a straight line like there, I don't necessarily flip my ruler around for that. You know, our quilting machines generally want to go in a straight line when it's either horizontal or vertical. So I can do those little bits of travel without requiring the ruler. It doesn't save a ton of time, but it saves a fraction of a second times many. So again, if you're enjoying this up close and personal look at quilting in my studio, I encourage you to hit the like button, subscribe, and if you click on the bell, you will get notifications whenever I am live. I try to air these live and unscripted episodes twice a month, but the first and third Friday is always my goal. And when I'm traveling and when that changes, I try and let you know. Get those threads snipped.
What's the name of your ruler?
The ruler that I'm using is by A1 Quilting Machines, and it is a 9-inch straight. I don't think it has a name beyond that. I purchased mine through greenfairyquilts.com. They're a husband and wife owned shop, great little shop, great prices. I'm sure A1 sells it directly too, but I don't know that firsthand. A little too far. Back up, back up. There we go. Aren't these prints that I'm stitching over wonderful? I'm a huge Alison Glass fan. Her colors are so incredibly rich and gorgeous. This was one of her collections from a few years back. I got fat quarters of all of them, and I've made several projects, and they're always favorites. And I think I did mention already, but in case not, the solid fabric is by Paintbrush Studios, and the color is Yarrow. So the quilt that's hanging on the wall behind me, I did make it a couple of years ago, but with the pandemic being what it was, it had not ever been in a quilt show. So this last fall, I entered it in our local quilt show, and it was amusing to kind of stand quietly and hear the reactions because they were very strong. You either loved it or hated it. So either people were standing saying, you know, oh my word, I love that color. That just makes everything pop. Or people were saying, what in the world was she thinking? Mustard. Oh look, I forgot to stitch in the ditch of this one. We'll just remedy that. But you see how easy it is to miss one part, even when you're going around and around it. It is all too easy. You're getting a pretty close-up view, so I'm sure you're seeing there are times when I'm hitting the hillside. And, you know, note to self, I keep telling myself this, it looks better to have a couple threads away from the seam on the ditch side than to get up on the hill, if that makes sense. Because somehow it changes the look of the seam when you press down that hillside. So, note to self, give myself a little bit more room. Okay, check this out, guys. Have we got a close-up? Is that what we're on camera? Can you see this? Look, I forgot to put the little line in there. For goodness sakes. Mr. Producer tells me this is what I get for talking. Probably true. But no big deal. We'll just go tuck it in. Let me just clip the threads. There we go. So a motion that I am still getting used to is when I stop, certain stop buttons on my Bernina lift the presser foot, the hopper foot, and it's one of the buttons that I was used to using frequently on my Gamel, and I have to kind of reroute my thinking because it's important with ruler work that that presser foot be down, so before you put the needle down and start stitching. So you can see right now that it's up, and I can slide my ruler right under there, and that's a problem. So I need to be sure to have my presser foot down like this. So the moral to that story is know your machine. It takes quite a big thump to put the timing out on a long arm machine, but stitching into a ruler will do it. Mr. Producer is asking how I know this, and actually I have not ever done it. I've never broken a ruler with a needle either, but I certainly know others who have, so I know it can happen. As you can see, this is not a process for hurrying. Ruler work is a little bit time consuming, but I'll tell you what else it is. It is, because it's accurate, because it's defined by all these straight lines, it also can make some beginner level quilting look spectacular. Very early on in my quilting, I did a ridiculously elaborate ruler based quilt, And I found that to be true because the elements are so clearly outlined and so accurate because of stitching with a ruler. Then when you go and add things free motion and it's a little bit wobbly and a little bit kindergarten looking, it doesn't matter. It still looks spectacular because of the ruler work. I didn't specifically mention, and I should, you also need to have a ruler foot on your machine. So it's got the taller sides. That too is your barrier against the ruler, and that's really important that you don't have a darning foot or something like that on. You must have the sided foot. And if you're quilting on a domestic machine, these are available for domestic machines as well. Many domestic machines. Perhaps not all, but it's getting more and more common. Clearly, so many quilters were quilting on domestic machines and were missing out on the fun of doing ruler work. And so now many brands have the ruler feet and the rulers. I don't see any reason why you can't use the same ruler on a domestic machine. I don't do ruler work on mine, so I'm not 100% sure there. Maybe one of you want to chime in the comments. But as far as I know, the ruler qualifications are the same. You know, the thicker ruler, etc. Thicker than your cutting rulers, for example. Funny story for you, though. That first ruler quilt that I did, it was a Camille Ross Kelly, her quilt Swoon. Many of you will be familiar with that pattern, and I did incredibly intricate quilting on it. And I had not yet invested in a good ruler, straight ruler like this one for my long arm, because I wasn't sure if I would like that or not, right? So what I did have is the ruler that you saw me marking with earlier. It's an add a quarter ruler, which has one side that's thick. It's got that 1/4 inch raised edge. So I did the whole quilt with that add a quarter ruler. So I'm here to tell you it does work, but it was very exhausting on the hand. But after that quilt, then I was pretty sure I did like ruler work, so I bit the bullet and bought one. Okay, did I get everything before I move on? Yes, I did. That is all 5 of our stars. I am going to read some questions, have a sip of coffee, and then I'm going to do a little bit of marking. So I'll chat a little bit. If some of the questions are longer, I'll hold them until I get into marking. But let us take some questions. You need to see the screen? And how is the lighting looking on the quilting? Maybe you've been talking to Mr. Producer and I don't have to ask the question, but I just want to make sure that it's fine. Okay, Christine, are your classes appropriate for domestic machine quilters? There are some percentage of students, yes, who work at a domestic machine. A few of them are row-based, which I think might be more difficult at the domestic, but many of them, just by making the scale a little bit smaller and tighter, would translate very well. I'm hoping in the near future actually to re-record all of those lessons and also show them at a domestic machine, because I do think that it does translate well. I don't show them that way yet, and so I don't want to mislead you in any way. Jennifer, I love the color of the quilt and you out the box. Are you coming to Paducah, Kentucky Quilt Show April 23? I'm not this year. No. Maybe next year, though. I've never been to Paducah, so I'd love to. Jeannie, which ruler foot are you using on your Bernina? I prefer the 72 to the 96 and like the 72S. Yes, that's the one I have on, Jeannie. So the 72S, for those of you who aren't Bernina owners, it's the hopper foot with the round sort of collar, but it's got a slit in one side so you can pull your top thread through it without having to thread it through. So it's very convenient. Marcia, I see you're using your regulated stitching. Are you using Precise or Cruise? I'm using Precise. I'm just skimming over the whole thing. And I did talk about that a little bit earlier. In Bernina terms, it's BSR1 and BSR2. So BSR1 kind of coasts when you come to a stop. The needle still keeps going and then off it goes when you start moving again. BSR2, it stops and waits for me. So when I hold still, the needle's not stitching. And then when I move again, away it goes. And I do like the precise. That's my personal preference. How well did the 80 weight bobbin thread hold up to regular use on a bed? Well, Carol, I have not done it in a quilt and then used it for years and years on a bed, but I do not hear any adverse comments from quilters. I really don't. So it seems, and it's been around for a number of years. So I feel like you'd be hearing the buzz if people were not happy with it. That's all I know. Juliana, does the masterclass cover ruler work? It does not, Juliana. And it is entirely free motion, and most of it is edge to edge. I do touch on how you can use these designs in custom work. Most of it is edge to edge. That is very much the focus. And part of the reason that I started the advanced membership was so that I could feature some other things. So far, I have not done any ruler work lessons there, but I do anticipate them in the future. So that was part of the thinking there. So I don't know if you can hear that in the background. My phone is ringing. Mr. Producer is turning it off, and so he can't load any more questions. Sorry about that. I forgot to put Do Not Disturb on. Anyway, one more sip of coffee. There are more questions. Okay, hang on a sec. Did I mention it does make it easier too if you put the letter Q in front of them? I know I didn't mention that. Shame on me. Because then we can run a search for them. And sometimes the questions can get lost in the flow of chatting. So if we've missed any questions. Heidi, when you say hillside when ditching, do you mean the upper side of the press seam? Correct. So if the seam is pressed to one side, there will definitely be a lower ditch and there will be a higher hillside. And I'm attempting to stitch in the ditch side. That adds the best definition. Roberta, will you be coming to PIQF this year, and do you have a schedule of quilt shows you will be at for Bernina? I do not yet. Many things go into that. One of them is I'm still traveling later this month to a dealer training, so I'm not fully certified yet on some of the elements like the Q-matic. So as I get that completed, then my schedule will start falling into place. So far, I only have a very few that are firmly booked. But I expect to be doing things on the western side of the country, yes. So I think that's a hopeful one. Jennifer, is Isacord thread the same as glide thread? For some reason, everybody's using glide. Who sells Isacord thread? They're similar in that they're both trilobal, 100% polyester threads. Very strong, a little bit glossy, very low lint, and I think that's what's attractive about them. The Isacord is a 40 weight, and the glide is more commonly, people are using the 60, which is a little finer. So I think that's the real attraction there. For me, the attraction with Isacord has been, in the past, the great volume of colors that were available to me. Because I was doing a lot of client quilting, they have over 300 colors. I loved that accessibility. Now, as I'm doing a little less client quilting, I'm experimenting with some other brands and finding that I like them too. In terms of who sells Isacord, a lot of quilt shops do. Also, you can look online. I know that it's available on eBay, for example. That's where I got it for years. I found a seller that had a great price with free shipping and stocked all the colors. So, and now I have a wholesale account, but that's how I did it for years. So, but quilting shops do carry it too. Sue Tap, does the foot on the Bernina lift higher than it did on Lucy? Yes, it does. Even with the foot up on my sit-down long arm, I can't slip the ruler under it. Yep, because it's got the presser foot lift. It lifts up more than ½ inch off the quilt surface. Yep. Lynn, there are some rulers available for low shank domestic machines. I first learned on my domestic before getting my long arm. Probably true, Lynn. I'm not as well versed in those pieces of equipment because I don't use them often. So that's good to know. Mary Jo, not quilt related, but you mentioned a coffee warmer. Which one do you have? It's just a little electric hot pad type of deal. Mr. Producer was trying to show you, but I don't think it shows up. And it's not working well because every time I stand here with my coffee for a minute, it automatically shuts off and then I have to return it on and push buttons, and that's just going to be way too much work. So lukewarm coffee it is. Cheers. Sandy, you found a red solo cup. I did. Dave was actually at a friend's house one evening, and he was serving beverages in red Solo cups. So he's like, "Oh, hey, can I have one of those for Susan?" So, you know, best Valentine's Day gift ever. Miriam, joining you again, wanted to tell you I purchased a ruler, and I'm sorry I lost it and used it. Great. Yeah, love the ruler. Glad you do too. Okay, we think that's about it for questions. If you've got a burning question and it has been missed, maybe type it back in with a Q in front of it. Sue Pfeiffer's asking one more thing about tension. Bottom tension seems to be better with a slower speed. Thoughts? Can't say that I have found that to be true. I've experimented when I'm having tension trouble with using manual or constant mode as opposed to regulated, because sometimes that will make a touch of difference. I can't say that I've found the slower speed to help, but know your machine. That's kind of the bottom line, isn't it? Okay, that's it for questions for now. Alrighty, here's what I'm going to do next. I want to do an echo stitching around each of the star blocks. I'm just trying to decide where to move Stella so that you guys can see. There we go. And what I learned from another quilter years ago is that when you're trying to do accurate spacing, it turns out a lot better if you pre-mark it. So marking is optional because your ruler does have markings. You could just use those markings to, you know, echo the stitching around the stars. But somehow, partly because of the thickness of the ruler and you're viewing it from different angles, you get slight differences there. For me, I found her advice to be really true. I get a much more accurate spacing if I pre-mark it. So that's what I'm going to do today. So, you know, fire off some questions. We can talk while I do this. I am just going to take the time to go ahead and mark this echo stitching around all these stars. And it is going to take a couple of minutes, but to me, it's worth it. It also really helps because the points are extending, you know, out into the background fabric. That's very hard to guesstimate, you know, where that point should be and where you should actually pivot your stitching. So again, the pre-marking gives you that precise point to stop on. So to me, it seems worth it. Glad you have some nice music to listen to, because this is a little bit like watching grass grow, isn't it? And it doesn't matter if your lines overextend beyond the points. You'll just know to stop quilting at the points. I'll know that too if I'm paying attention while I'm stitching. There's one. Let's see if it's faster if I do the ruler all in one direction first. I was at a Chandra Pierce event last night. She was in our church, actually. And oh my word, my sides still hurt from laughing. If you've never listened to Chandra Pierce, she's a comedian, a Christian lady, you know, kind of a motivational speaker too, but just hysterical, strong Southern accent. And somehow that just makes everything funnier. There's two. So once again, I'm just using an air erase marker. If you happen to live in a very humid climate, I've heard from other quilters that these do not work well for them because they disappear fairly quickly, but I live in a super dry climate, so it's my go-to marker. after these events are over, after the live portion is over, I always go back and add chapters so that you can kind of find topics. Well, I shouldn't say always so strongly. In recent episodes I've been doing that, and I want to keep up the practice now. Earlier episodes you won't find it. But I also add a big section in the show notes that is links to some of my favorite tools, including the ruler that I'm using today, including the red snapper system, including these markers. So everything that is in that list, many of them have affiliate links, so be aware of that, but everything that is in that list is what I actually use and things that I have found to be really helpful. So my lines are a 1/4 inch echo. And there is markings on the ruler that are enabling me to see that. And as much as I can, as much as it's within my reach, I try and kind of be looking straight on at the ruler. As I mentioned earlier, the markings, the ruler manufacturers have thought of it, and the marking is on the bottom, but there is a little bit of distortion. There just is when you look through the ruler from a funky angle. So if you can keep your angle reasonably consistent, it helps. But really, ultimately, marking, I feel like, is the greatest help in keeping that accurate. When I have tried to just stitch using the ruler as my guide and just placing the ruler and then stitching, I just cannot get it as accurate. Not even close, actually. And because this will be on the solid fabric, it's probably going to be the most eye-catching thing on this quilt, aside from the circled dots, which we're going to do in a few minutes. So it's a little more important, really, than what I stitched in the prints, which is just kind of hidden, right? So if you're enjoying this, do hit that like button. Helps it to get viewed by more quilters. Feel free to share the episode with your friends. And I do try and air these live and unscripted episodes the first and third Friday of each month. Come on, Stella, stay where I'm putting you over there. She just wants to roll back. We've got a fair number of wires attached, enough that it's actually providing weight and making her not stay where she ought to be. So now I've got about 3 lines drawn there, but I drew the proper one, nice and dark. The 1/4 inch echo is kind of my go-to, but experiment with it. I've done some other quilts that have kind of bigger overall elements, and I've used a 1/2 inch echo, and it's quite striking, especially if you've got a double bat. It's a statement, but I think the scale of that would be too big for this quilt. So everything is stabilized now, right? Because I've stitched every star, so I feel like it doesn't really matter anymore in what order that I do things. Every area that's unquilted is quite small. It's not going anywhere. I like, do we have a close-up? Because this, I'm going to point this out. I learned this from another quilter too, and I don't know who, but I don't usually tie and bury my threads, but I still want my joins to look as unobtrusive as possible. So the suggestion that I got from her was that you start before a corner with your stitching and don't do a lock stitching. just begin your stitching and go to the point. And then what happens is when I complete and come back around, I'll stitch back over, you know, 8 or 10 of those stitches and anchor those in that way without it being a very obvious anchoring. So I have found that to be helpful. And I'm stopping at each point. You can probably see my little camera lights going out. I would not have to, but I have all too often bumped the machine when it's still engaged. And oh, is that ever a pain? So I just pause at the corners. And if I had my druthers right now, one of the great features of the Bernina is that I can move the handlebars in any number of ways. So by choice, I would flip the left handlebar way up and out of the way, and it would give my left arm, which is holding the ruler, a lot more room to work. But for you guys, I've got that left arm down because the camera's attached to it. That's a funny squeak. What's that? I think it was just against the ruler. It's the hopper foot. Makes a funny noise against the acrylic sometimes. It was doing it to me yesterday too. And here's my little overlapping stitches coming up, so I'm just making sure that I'm lined up. For my ending one, I do have to do a couple lock stitches because there's nothing going over them and holding them down. Still, it's a pretty modest join. I'm okay with that. Perfect. That's one star done. Several to go. Again, you can see how super useful the handle on the ruler is. Whoa! I just wobbled. Big wobble. That one's got to come out. I am unsure how I did that, but I did. And being a reality show, you get to see it all. So there's my wobble. That is certainly part of the learning curve of working with a ruler. Is it just feels awkward at the beginning when you're changing directions to push against the ruler, and because you can't always push in the same direction, right? So you're always having to adjust and change. But it becomes more easy with practice, for sure. Except clearly sometimes it still goes awry. Okay, that squeak is funny. It is the ruler and the hopper foot, though, I promise. I don't know if you guys can even hear that. It's a very sharp squeak going on. I might have to WD-40 the edge of my ruler or something. That kind of seems... I wonder if I can do that and then let it dry. If anybody's got any ideas, let me know. I'm going to try another straight edge just to see if that makes a difference. Bear with me a second while I find one. So now you're getting an object lesson, and what I love so much about the yellow ruler is the grip on it. The one that I'm using now does not have that, but also doesn't have a squeak, so there's that. Stop right in the point. The one I'm using now is part of the QCR Curve It set. Also a very nice ruler in terms of size, not too terribly big. If you're new to ruler work, experiment too with where you hold your arm. So for example, here I had my ruler on the top. I prefer that and to push up against it, but you could also have had your ruler on the bottom and be pulling towards you against it. So that all just feels a little bit different. So experiment with that and find out how you feel like you have the most control over your ruler. So Mr. Producer went and gave my ruler a quick clean. Good thing I've got my marking done because they're gone now too. But we already did that, so yay us. I'll show you this one after I get my thread clipped. You can get a really good look at how that join looks. I'll try to get the light on it. It's right there. So it is a touch darker because there's 2 layers of thread there, but it's pretty minimal. Again, I don't think the people sitting at my table eating will notice it. Oh yes, let's try the yellow ruler now. I didn't get my stitch right on the line, so I'm going to try that again, pulling up my thread. Let's see if it has stopped squeaking. Clip the threads. We're on the second to last star. Next is going to be the dots. And finally, we're going to do a little bit of fill, and I debated over what kind of fill to do, but I decided to stick with what I did on the original quilt, which is a fairly small scale meander. For a long time, I was kind of opposed to meanders. It just seemed like oh look, I missed one line. It seemed like an almost cop-out design, you know, that's what people did when they couldn't think of what to do. But I have learned that I actually quite love the texture that it provides when it's done in a small scale particularly. So you be the judge. It seems to me that I saw it one time at a quilt that was hanging up, you know, as they do in a quilt shop, and you're a little bit of a distance away from it, and hanging, I saw this gorgeous texture. It was printed, so you couldn't really see the quilting initially. And then I went up to have a closer look, and I thought, that's meandering, and it is spectacular. So now I've become kind of a fan of it. And thank you, Mr. Producer. The squeaks are gone. So apparently a number of you mentioned try wax, and that is what Dave did, and that removed the squeak, so thank you for that. While I'm saying thank you, actually, I have another one I wanted to mention. A few of you were very generous with your Buy Me a Coffees this week, and I sure appreciated that. We have recently gotten a few things. I use all of that money to, we use all of that money to upgrade the equipment for our live stream. And so we recently acquired another 2 cameras, but I just wanted to mention I appreciated it so much. And I sent everyone a little note as well on the app. It means a lot to us. We would do this just for the fun of it, but it's nice to have the recognition, and I know some of you realize maybe you do some of this type of thing yourself, and you have some realization of the time that it takes and the expense and the equipment that it takes to do. We were trying to kind of guesstimate the other day. I can't remember who we were talking to that was asking about, you know, how much time it takes to do this live streaming, and we figure that we put about 10 hours into each episode. It seems like, you know, live streaming should be kind of effortless. You just go on air, don't you? But in fact, there's a fair bit of setup, and certainly for Dave, there's quite a bit of technical setup that he does each week. So I certainly appreciate it. This is not a thing I would set out to do on my own. And I hope you guys appreciate it too. Maybe you want to give him some kudos in the comments. Or just a few more thumbs up. Those are always lovely. I've mentioned already that next Friday, I believe that date is the 24th of March, we will be in Tri-Cities at a quilt show, and we're going to attempt to live stream from the floor of the quilt show. So this will be a first for us, so we'll see how it goes. We're trying some new equipment, various ways to make it visible to the audience that is there live, as well as to you on the stream. So we'll see how that goes. But that's coming up next Friday. Okay, that is all our outlining done. Next, I'm going to take a few questions, and then we're going to mark our circles. Let me grab my magic elixir. Melinda, what is your needle and tension combo you use with Isacord? I currently have an 80-16 needle on, I believe. I just put a fresh one in last night, which is a fairly fine needle. And the Bernina uses sewing machine needles. So it's the Schmetz brand. It's the same type that I would use in my sewing machine. And you asked the tension combination. I've got my Toa gauge set at 220 for the bottom, and I've got 4.25 on the top. So whether your machine is identical, I don't know. That's pretty close to a neutral tension. Okay, Melinda, again, we got that one. Sue, I'm very new. I've done 3 practice quilts. I found tension on the back not good in some spots. How much does needle size play into this, and what do you use? So you heard what I'm using at the moment. Schmetz needles. I believe my machine came with 100/18, which is a thicker, more robust needle for sure. But I think 80, 90, or 100, all of those are acceptable. And I changed them a little bit depending on what I'm quilting. Okay. If you're hearing me still, are we back on air?
We're back on YouTube, not on Facebook. Is it on Facebook?
Okay, so for reasons we don't know, the live stream ended on Facebook, and we're not sure if there was an interruption or not on YouTube, but here we still are, and we'll continue on. Okay, have we got any more questions?
I lost all the comments.
Okay. Wow. The gremlins today. So YouTube considerately erased all the comments too. So if you have questions, feel free to type them back in. I'm going to go ahead and start with the next thing, and then we'll revisit those questions again. I'm sorry about that, but sometimes these things just do happen, and they're way beyond our control. So if you have more questions, type them in. I'm going to get on to the next set of marking. So the next thing is the dots that I'm going to put in place. And I already on the quilt top marked the location of them with a dot. So I'm going to go ahead though and take my ruler and make kind of crosshairs at that point. It will just enable me to center my circle over the dot, if that makes sense. So I'm using this handy little hollow, which camera are we on? Right there. It's just a hollow circle, right? So to just lay that on there, it's a little bit by guess and by gosh. So I'm just going to go ahead where my dots are and put a line. It's easy to make it parallel because I've got so many seams going on, right? And then my little circle has markings on it at the 90 and 45 degree angles. So now when I drop my circle on there, I can exactly match up those reference points with my crosshairs. And that way I know my circles will be perfectly centered over the dots, and they'll be in a straight line, etc. So this little tiny ruler that I have, it is a long arming ruler. It is thick. I find it really unwieldy to stitch with just because it's so small and difficult to hang on to. So for today's purposes, it is just a marking tool. I think when I did the original quilt behind me, I think this little set of hollowed out circles was all I had for round one, so I think I did do it with this one, but it was tricky. So someone is asking why I pre-marked around the stars rather than using the ruler only. That is strictly personal preference, but I learned from a quilter years ago that if you do pre-mark, you are much more apt to get very accurate spacing, and that I have found to be true in my quilting. If I do not pre-mark, if I just use the lines on the ruler, perhaps because you're looking through a depth of ruler, I just had a difficult time keeping my spacing really accurate, and it shows on this solid fabric. It shows. So I want it to be as accurate as I can, as consistent as I can. So I find it worth the time to mark. It's interesting. Fabric, you know, it's fabric. It has a little flexibility to it. So even marking these, I'm finding that the circles don't look perfectly round when I'm done, just from the pressure of my marker on the fabric, shifting it a little bit. So So I'm really trying to put even pressure on my circle dot and even pressure on my marker and keep my marker kind of straight up and down to keep them as round as I can. It's going to be tricky to get little round circles at the best of times, so I'm just trying to improve my odds. So tomorrow apparently is National Quilting Day. Maybe some of you are typing that in the comments. Are you doing anything fun for that? I do know that March is also National Quilting Month. There's all kinds of social media things going on for National Quilting Month. My marking seems to work better if I put hefty pressure on my ruler, my marking ruler, to keep it in place. Yeah, those look nice. Nice little bullseyes. As always, I will post photographs of this when it is done so you kind of get the effect of it. You know, it's a little bit minimized when you see these lovely purple markings all over the dots. But I will post some good pictures of it too. Big shout out to Maria, who's watching live in the wee hours of the morning in Australia. I'm so glad you're here. So I'm making a judgment call, you guys. I'm looking at the quilt over my shoulder, and I realize though I have a spacer on the ends, like the far right and left end of my quilt, I only did my buttons in the in-between ones, and I'm going to stick with that because I like that look where they're symmetrical and centered between the stars, and I'm not going to put them on the outer edges. Also, it makes fewer circles to quilt. Okay, have we got any questions or comments before I start quilting these? Do I know the root of the word quilt? No, I do not. Okay, the word quilt comes from the Latin word calcita, which means stuffed sack. It became adapted to the English language from the French word quilt. Lovely. I did not know that, so I've learned something new today. Roxanne, I took your suggestion and tried using manual mode. It's so much smoother. I love it. Curious, what speed do you use on manual mode? Roxanne, I can't remember now. Do you have a Bernina too? I've been using 1400 lately, but that does vary a little bit depending on what I'm quilting. So 1400 is when I'm doing a bigger edge to edge type of thing. If I was doing little bubbles, for example, I would slow that way down. More? Oh, okay. We're up and away. All right, I think we're all done marking, so I can put the marker away. I think we're all done little circles, so I can put that away just to get a few less things on my quilt surface here. All right, we're going to start with some of these circles. Now, this ruler, by the way, is new to me. So we're going to see how it works. You guys get to try it out with me. So again, I'm just going to start at a point on the circle, and when I make my way around, I'm going to stitch again over those stitches. So I'm going to put my ruler right on top of the thread tails, which will, with luck, hold them in place. Okay, I need to have my presser foot down. Like that. See, that's why I didn't start stitching first. So this was my question, and it remains my question. There's not quite enough leeway in there. Can you see what I'm seeing, my marking? Let's just see how it works, because this ruler is supposed to do a perfect half circle. Let's see if it's perfect. See, it didn't come all the way up to the line. That was my worry. It didn't do quite a half circle. Perhaps because I didn't have it in the right place. And now I have found another problem. Can you see my problem up there by the red snapper? Yes, this is a problem. Did we mention live and unscripted? Okay, the answer is probably going to be going around this one, but is it the same size? Well, I think so too. So this, I know you can't see it, but this has little crosshairs on it too. So let's see if that works with my handy dandy bullseye markings. The real proof of the pudding will be if I hit the stitches that I started with when I get to the end. Close. But I'll give myself a little grace because that's the first one I've done with that ruler. That is the first one. You guys got to see that. And we're going to call it good because when we fill that up with some meandering, it's going to look grand, I think. That's what I'm telling myself. What's that they say about viewing it from a galloping horse? I mean, this does show on the solid fabric, so it's not quite that forgiving. But I'm going to give myself some grace and call it lovely. Okay, I've got to figure out how to do this, how to make the presser foot be down when I pull up my ruler. If I turn the regulator on and then pause it, right, it's really important to me that that hopper foot not hit my ruler. There, I nailed it. Look at that, right on my purple line. Yahoo! Okay, and then we'll use this side, which is kind of neat because I don't actually have to shift my ruler all about, right? I use the innie and the outie and then I'm good to go. Mr. Producer is laughing at me. He's like, I bet they designed it to do that. Like, I bet they did. I just bet some smart quilter did. This is why I do not design rulers, because I wouldn't have thought of that. Look at that. I'm pretty pleased. Can you guys see that circle? Whew. I'm pretty pleased with that. Okay. We're going to be experts by the time we're done. 3, 6, 9, 12 of them. Presser foot down, hopper foot down. I always say presser foot because that's what it is on the sewing machine. I don't know if it's the same term on here or not. There's a picture on my screen. I just go by the picture. I didn't land quite exactly on my line that time. I'm sure it's operator error. So what I'm going to do is pause at the top of my circle and shift my ruler just the tiniest little bit, like a 32nd of an inch. Smooth move. Anchor those stitches. I'm pleased. Is it perfect? Couldn't go that far. But it's pretty good. That's 3. I'm just taking the moment to kind of move my head around a little bit and make sure that my ruler is evenly placed, right? I don't want to err, you know, turning it a little bit makes a difference. And so just making sure that it's a uniform spacing from my line hopefully will help me get that perfect spacing. And seriously, by the time I get to 12, I will have this figured out. I didn't get it perfectly because I didn't stay on the line perfectly, but it's getting better. Yeah, just like the last one. Somehow I went a little bit wide on that first half, so I've got to make an adjustment there. I got my join perfectly that time. That was a plus. Sorry about that pause. There was a bad cough coming on. So I feel like I'm shifting my ruler a little bit as I go around that because I'm always getting too wide. So I've got to somehow adjust my grip just a little, because that has happened 3 times in succession. So now I've got to say that's habitual. Got to fix that. I think I'm going to take my little water spritzer and I'm going to spritz that one and see if it looks round, if I can be satisfied with the look of it. We'll just let that sit and think for a minute. Okay, let's get this in place, get a good grip on it, and focus on don't shift that ruler even a little bit. Here we go. And that seemed to do it. I landed right at the crosshairs. I stayed right on the traced line. It's just a matter of learning how to control this ruler then. Beautiful. Ooh, I'm happy with that. Okay, this might be a new favorite ruler. And it, by the way, is by Jody Robinson. Jody, J-O-D-I. And looking at my moistened one, I'm happy with that. It looks round. It reads round, even if it wasn't exactly precise. I'm going to spritz one other one that I think had a teeny tiny jog in the edge, and we're going to have a look at that and decide if I need to redo that one. Okay, we have 6 done, 6 to go. Someone's asking the name of my circle ruler, the one that I drew with, because I just mentioned the one that I'm quilting with. The one that I drew with, oh boy, I've had that for so many years, I could not tell you, and it does not have a name on it. So it came in a set of rings. I will tell you, it is not my favorite one because somehow that 1/4 inch thickness of ring is not robust enough to use for quilting. So I've ended up using them for marking. But it comes with a set and I think it goes all the way up to 8 inches. What's nice about them, because they are 1/4 inch, and I'm sure this is what the designer had in mind, is you can trace, 2 echoed lines with them. So they have their pluses. I got them in a store that sells handy quilters, so maybe start by looking there. The one that I'm using now is Jody Robinson with the little circles. I don't think it is. Mr. Producer thinks it's a Jody Robinson as well. She might have a very similar design. I do know that my personal opinion is Jody is a great designer. I just went all wonky. I'm talking too much. Jody is a great designer with a lot of experience quilting, and I think I don't have very many of her rulers, but I would trust her rulers just because she puts a lot of thought and experience into her design of them. So it's not just a person at a ruler manufacturing place. And this is part of the challenge of quilting with rulers. You have to keep that pressure toward the ruler all the time. So when you're going around a circle, you're changing that pressure the whole way around the circle, right? Very doable. But when I'm talking as well, I don't pay attention as good as I should. And so this is what happens. There's a knot where I paused. This is how you know you have good tension, when wherever you paused, even for 1 or 2 stitches, you can hardly get it to come undone. That's because your thread's twisted at exactly the middle of your quilt and it's holding, which is good news, as long as you're not trying to undo it. one of my, I was talking earlier about my advanced membership. It's a monthly subscription, and the fact that I put new content in there each month, and it varies a little bit. So one of the things that's coming up in April is some of my best tips for undoing. Because sadly, that is part of long arming. And the, more pain-free that you can make it, the better. So I just did a couple video clips of me undoing and tried to walk you through all the shortcuts that I have found and my favorite tools and ways to do it. So it's not a glamorous topic, but hopefully a useful one. Again, I'm pausing at the top to just move my ruler over a tinge. One of the features which we've mentioned today on the Bernina is the fact that the presser foot raises, and the nice thing about that is you can actually get your fingers under it to grasp a thread. But somehow when I'm cutting my threads, especially when I'm ending, I always want a tail on the bobbin thread, and so I always pull my machine away for that reason. So then it becomes kind of habitual. So when I start quilting, it's actually wiser to not pull my machine away because my needle's in the right position. But you know how those motions kind of get automatic and you don't even think about them. Let's see if we can get another perfect one. We do not have a perfect one here, but there's no jogs in it, so that's a plus. I keep missing my red solo cup and then my thread falls. I'm sure you see it in the camera. So right here, if I get my needle right on the line, I can actually reach under and grab my bobbin thread, which is very convenient when I remember to do it. So no matter how much care I'm taking, I seem to be going low on the bottom of these. So I'm just going to try with my next one to actually make an adjustment in how I line it up. Since I'm consistently getting that result, is that because I'm looking through the ruler at an angle? And that's very possible. Three more. After this, all that's left is the fill. How are we doing for time, Mr. Producer?
I don't know if
So this time, I'm looking at the crosshairs that are on my ruler, and I'm putting them visually to my eye. They're just a tiny touch above the crosshairs that I've drawn on my quilt. Because I realize I'm looking through the ruler at an angle, right? And since I'm consistently quilting below the curve, let's see if this gets me right on the curve. And it does. So that's helpful to know. I just need to make that very tiny adjustment in how I'm viewing it. that is the best one so far. Awesome. Last one. Beautiful. And I wobbled. Let's see how it looks. And if I caught it soon enough. I think I am going to call it satisfactory. I am. All right, we have got all the bubbles quilted. I'm gonna go back and look at that first one that I thought had a little wobble too. I'm calling it good. I'm calling it good, folks. This is my own quilt, so no one else is looking at it with a critical eye. Only me. All right, we are ready to do our fill. Shall we take a couple more questions before I begin on that? My thinking is that it's going to be a little bit like watching paint dry, because it's going to be a stipple or a small meander. And so I'll do it for a little while and then take some questions about it. You want to put the straight on camera on? I'll do a bit of it and take some questions about it or comments if you have any, and I won't stay on air for the whole thing because it's apt to take a little while, and not much is going to change. But I'll do at least one block and then you'll get a good look at how it relates to the star and what the overall look is like. Betsy is asking, does the ruler have grips on the back? It doesn't, Betsy. And I personally have not typically put grips on the back of my ruler. I know there are various dots and things that you can get. Certainly that would probably be an aid. I've just gotten used to quilting without them. That's the only comment. Okay, we've kept up with questions.
It's easier to go Facebook. We should just stick to YouTube.
All right, one sip, and we're good to go. I'm going to start in the top left-hand corner because why not? And this is just going to be a process of moving around the quilt. In general, I'm going to try to do the top half of it and then work my way back doing the bottom half because there's some smaller areas it's going to be a bit difficult to move around in. Whoops, I turned the regulator on and I wanted to pull one stitch up. See if I can find that bobbin thread and pull it up. No, I can't, so I'll just start again. Oh, there we go. What I'm going to do is start with the stitch regulator on just for a minute to get the feel of my tiny meander, and then I'm going to put it in constant mode. I definitely find that easier for meandering. It just is easier to have that smooth motion. So this is approximately what size we're going to do it in. I'm going to bump my stitch length up to 12 because it's going to be fairly fine. That's what I'm thinking right there. So I'm just going to make sure the tension is good. Just getting a nail under there to feel it. A good look at it. It seems to be fine. Okay, we're going to work in manual mode. I've got it at 1,000 right now. We'll start there and we'll adjust if we need to. Let's see what it's doing. That's actually pretty good. So on my machine, that means 1,000 stitches per inch. Different machines have different ways. Some state it as a percentage, etc. I'm actually going to pause it. I'm going to turn that down just a little. I'm feeling a bit rushed. So now I've got it at 940. Not a whole lot different, is it? I'm going to take it down a little bit more. I don't want the stitches to be so tiny that they look microscopic. Let's Let's take it down a little more. We'll go down to 900, maybe even 880. There we go. That's better. This is so individual from person to person. So I really recommend experimenting with it. If you're feeling pushed like you've got to rush, then it's too fast. And if you're getting big galloping stitches, then it's too slow. Play around with it a bit. Especially if you're doing it as a fill on a project like this. You've got a lot of it, so it's important to be comfortable doing it. I think what I'll do for the purposes of showing you guys what it looks like is I'll go ahead and go all the way around this one star and kind of finish up this block. And then you can see the overall effect. So as a quick review, this entire table topper is one row out of my pattern Starstruck. It's the quilt that you've seen on the wall behind me throughout this show. And it was originally published as a block of the month, so each row features a different star and a little bit different skill set. My thinking being it's a great way to feature some different kinds of piecing and some different skills that you can get more precise and more accurate about with some pattern blocks that are not terribly challenging. I would say this is a pretty confident beginner, but if you like a challenge or like a puzzle, certainly you could do it as a beginner. There's not any hyper intense skills in it. So all that to say, that Starstruck pattern, we put it together as one entire downloadable PDF, and it is available in my Etsy shop. My shop is Stitched by Susan 2015, but Dave has also put a link in the comments. But if you can't find that comment, look for Stitched by Susan 2015 on Etsy. And I do have a couple of other patterns there, but that has not been my strong suit. I decided to stick to quilting. This is your last chance if you want to get any more questions in or comments. The next Live and Unscripted will certainly be something edge to edge. I don't know for sure yet what the project will be. You can sign up for my newsletter at stitchedbysusan.com, and then you will get advance notice of what the project is and some of the topics that will be covered within that newsletter. If you're looking for easy listening, check out my podcast, Measure Twice, Cut Once. You can find that one at podcast.stitchedbysusan.com. And if you're enjoying this episode, hit the like button, subscribe, even click on the bell so that you get notifications of whenever I'm going live. It is certainly my goal to keep these episodes casual They are just an opportunity to hang out in my studio with whatever I'm working on. It is very frequently a client quilt. So the styles, the colors, the thread choices are all dictated by what I think is suitable to that quilt. As in the case of today's project, it is my own thing. You can see how even in my meandering, I'm pretty casual. There's no rhyme or reason to it, except that it's always turning a corner. And I'm pausing right there for a second because I've got a ruler plate on and I bumped up against the front of the rail ever so gently. So I'm going to move the quilt up about an inch. Another option would be to take the ruler plate off, but I'm not going to stop in the middle of my meandering and do that. Let's see if I can start again without making a bad jerk. Not too bad. If you are interested in contributing to the cost of the show, you can do that very easily at buymeacoffee.com/Stitched by Susan for as little as $5. You can make a contribution there, or if you wish, you can sign up for a monthly commitment of support. We sure do appreciate those of you who send coffee, quote unquote. We use all of those funds for continually improving our equipment and the quality of the live stream. That is our intention. You see why I have to keep this meander so tiny. I've got to fit in all these little points. Plus it offers a great contrast to the larger unquilted areas like the buttons and even the geometric triangle points of the star. I want there to be contrast there, so they're not all the same density of quilting. Did you see that? I actually crossed over a line a little bit. Do you think the quilt police are going to come after me? I say if they can find it, bring it on. I mean, your ultimate goal with meandering is not to cross over lines, but I do not think that is ever going to be visible to the naked eye. Almost to the corner of this block, and then I will pause and we'll pan over it a little bit so you can get a good view of the whole thing. Let me know what you think of meander as my choice of little fill. Keeping in mind that I've been working all week on a crazy custom quilt. I'm just about custom quilted out. So give me a little grace. Okay, let us detach Stella and have a peek. Okay. Okay, what's the best way? Shall I pan over it close up or do a big view? It's difficult to see with the light, isn't it? But what do you think? You can certainly see how this 1/4 inch echo just frames the star. I do love a frame like that, and I didn't get on all sides of the dots, but they're gonna pop when I get all that purple out of there, and when I release it off the tension of the long arm, they'll look like buttons. So that's what it looks like. Okay, Stella to the side. I'll pick up my mug, and we'll take some last comments before we go. Sue, I also have a Q24. I keep changing the buttons on the handle. Haven't found the perfect combination yet. Wondering what you have yours programmed to do. At this point, Sue, I have the button closest to me is my on-off switch, and the button further from me is my single stitch or my lock stitch. And I have not found the perfect combination for my left hand yet. So, Patricia, thanks so much. Just found your videos and now my first live with you today. Learned a lot today. I'm glad. And it's different every week, Patricia, because again, it's informed by whatever I happen to be working on. That's what I'm talking about. So, Sue, could you use Q-matic to stitch the circles and leave the ruler plate on instead of doing them manually? You absolutely could, Sue. I'm not comfortable enough with Q-matic yet to know how to accurately place them, but absolutely, and that would be a great use, I think, of Q-matic, is to put in those perfect geometric shapes and then do fun things around them freehand. Tammy Kelly, this episode was so helpful working on a fence rail star style memory quilt. Was thinking about meandering with ruler around stars prior to seeing this. Now I can better visualize it. There you go. And you can mess with the size of that meandering, right? Relative to the size of your stars. June, did you splice the batting? If so, how? June, you have sharp eyes, and I don't think your name is June, but that's what I see there, so that's what I'm calling you. I did. You have very sharp eyes. How? Let me just say, there's an earlier YouTube episode on splicing batting, and you should look at that. There is no stitching involved and no iron-on tape or anything like that. I do it with a kind of scalloped line, and that, by the way, is going to be one of the demos that I do at the Quilt Show on March 24. Because I get lots of questions about how I splice batting, and it's an easy way to do it, and it produces really good results in a quilt. Betsy, I just love the fill. Wish I could do it. You can. Just start slower. Start slower. It is not the easiest thing in the world. I kind of chuckle when people say, all I can do is a meander, because I do not think a meander is the easiest thing in the world, because you're always changing direction. But start at way slower than I'm going, and think of it like little dog bones. That's how I think of it. See if that helps. Gretchen, watching you quilt is mesmerizing. Oh, thanks. You know, and I find stitching with the stitch regulator off feels a little bit like that. That constant sound, I find that much more pleasing to listen to when I'm doing meandering like this than jerking around with the stitch regulator on. So it's my personal preference for sure. Well, folks, thanks so much for watching. As a teeny tiny recap, what I've been working on is a table topper runner. It's long and thin, and it was originally one row out of this quilt that is hanging behind me on the wall. I wasn't pleased with the coloring of the prints in it, so I replaced it. But this whole pattern is available in my Etsy shop. It's called STARSTRUCK. Originally a block of the month. Each row was a month. Each row focuses on a different star block. Semi-traditional blocks, kind of reimagined in some cases, and a different skill. So the pinwheels, the mini piecing, which is the ones right up here, and some maybe surprising tips for those. So the pattern is chock full of sewing tips and helpful hints, and you know me when I'm talking. That's how I am when I'm writing patterns too. I overthink it, over-deliver. Anyway, that's available in my Etsy shop. Dave's putting a link in the comments right now, yes? Yep. Okay, and in case you can't find that comment, my shop is Stitched by Susan 2015, and the pattern name is STARSTRUCK, so it's available there if you're interested in it. Lastly, I should say too before I go, coming up very soon is another edition of my Freehand Quilting Masterclass. So I have been running this twice a year so that it's pre-recorded. You can watch the lessons whenever you want, but the way I deliver it is you get one lesson each week or one module each week for 6 weeks. And for 8 weeks, I'm highly involved. So there's live Q&As going on. There's lots of activity in the Facebook group going on, that sort of thing. So the instruction, you can watch at your leisure, but there's lots of interaction and feedback. So that is coming up very shortly. I I've had to change the dates. It was going to be April 28th, but we're now having family guests, and so I'm going to mess with that date, so I'll be letting you know in my newsletter. It's probably going to be earlier rather than later. So watch for some free workshops coming up that are leading up to that, and the doors will be opening for another edition of that masterclass very soon. So newsletter can be found on my website, stitchedbysusan.com. I offer a little freebie there, a little pop-up. If you sign up for that, you'll get the newsletter and you'll know all the deets. I think that's everything, Mr. Producer. Yes. Thank you all so much for joining me. It's been fun to do this small custom quilting project with you, and I will see you hopefully next Friday. I'll be coming to you from the Tri-Cities Quilt Guild show floor. So we'll see you then. Have a great day.